If you look in your loft, I can guarantee there will be boxes and boxes of old black and white photos. And in your imagination, you have to guess what they would have looked like in colour. After all, the photograph, well, essentially would have been taken in colour, wouldn't it? And sometimes we think of, I don't know, the first thing that pops into my mind is like the First World War. We think of it as a war fought in black and white. It wasn't. Well, did you know that someone who has the job of bringing black and white photos to life is called a Colouriser? And one Colouriser has been working on a special project for Black History Month. Tom Marshall is the man behind the photographs and joins us now. Tom, hi.
Hi, Ben.
Look, before we talk about this latest project, just tell me technically what do you do to the photos?
Well, it's all done digitally, so it's Photoshop. So basically, I'll work on a digital copy or a scan of the original photo, and then it's a case of almost digitally painting layers over that photo to gradually build up the colour on top of the black and white image. So it takes a good few hours to complete, and it's sort of like painting really, but you have a guide underneath of what the sort of shade should be, and a lot of research I need to do, obviously, to try and get the most accurate colour possible.
I've looked at a couple of your Colourised photos online, and I mean, I'm not just saying this because you're on air with us, but honestly, it doesn't look like you've done anything to them. They look like a colour photograph. I mean, it's as simple as that. Whereas, yeah. I mean, years ago, people used to hand colour them, didn't they? And they always looked a bit sort of. It's a bit unfair, but it looked a bit cartoony.
I mean, people have been colorising pictures since the beginning of photography. That a lot of them, the early ones, were literally just painted over the photo. So you almost get a sort of a pastel-y paint effect, which you don't get with the digital because of the process. You can kind of get around that.
But how do you get? I mean, how do you get the depth and variation of green in foliage, for example? Because you can't just tell the computer to make it all green because it wouldn't look right.
No, you can't tell. Well, you can tell the computer. There are obviously AI processes now that can kind of guess things, but to get it accurate or as accurate as possible, it's doing everything manually. So I'll have to go in with different shades of green on the paintbrush and go over several different layers, and then it is like painting. Like I say, you just build up those layers until it looks right. So it is literally a case of building it up bit by bit, which is why it takes so long to do.
How did you get into it? I mean, it's a fascinating job. It's amazing.
Well, it's something I started really as a hobby. I studied media production at Lincoln, University of Lincoln, so I did a bit of Photoshop work and things on that course. But this is really something that I just wanted to see whether I could make a business out of it and offered it as a service to people. And it kind of built up from there. So personal family photos, I do things like book covers and museum archives and all these sort of amazing projects that have come off the back of it. So it really was just starting as a hobby. And now it's something I can make a bit of money off.
Well, I mean, it is astonishing. What really impresses me actually is that, I mean, I follow a guy on Twitter called, I think he's called on Twitter, not Quitter, Twitter. That's something else entirely. Babel Colour, I think he goes by, and he just brings the colour out of colour already, really early colour photographs. Yeah. And the point he keeps making, and I'd be interested to get your take on it, is that, the past was not black and white. In fact, It was vibrantly colourful. Clothes were far more colourful than we give them credit for.
This is what people seem to. Well, it's understandable people forget this because most of the archive is black and white. But yeah, if you look at original colour photos, there's some amazing ones. The ones that he's done as well on his Twitter. But there's things on. There were photos taken sort of in Russia in 1900, and just the colours are fantastic. Even the poorest people were wearing really bright clothes, and you just don't think about that when you look at a black and white photo. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot more colour in the past, and people didn't live in black and white, so that's what we try and bring out with a colorised photo.
What is quite stark is actually, and I know this is it's a slightly odd thing to say, but when you see a colorised photograph, you realise that those faces looking out at you could be looking through the window now. I mean, there's no difference. Whereas you look at a black and white photograph with mutton chop whiskers or whatever it might be, and you think, oh, that must be 100 and whatever years old. But actually, by the time you've put some colour into them, those faces and eyes are just as they are today.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of the photos, obviously I share things on social media every time I do a photo that I can share publicly, and you get that reaction from people that normally they'd scroll through a news feed, see pictures in black and white, and they're just overlooked, so you don't stop and look at it. But as soon as you've got that colour and you see the eyes of, normally the eyes of a person that just, jump out at you, you stop and have a read and learn something about that person. So that's what I enjoy most about it, is that reaction from people.
So, I mean, which takes us sort of neatly to the project that you're doing for Black History Month. What was that? What did that involve? What did you want to achieve?
Well, that was, my most recent project. I found quite a lot of photos in the US archives of, it was the transatlantic slave trade, and there were lots of photos taken during the American Civil War of escaped slaves who had been, there was a particular photo of one slave called, I think his name was Whipped Peter, was the nickname that he was given, and it was his back was just covered in scars because he'd been captured, escaping from his master, and that was sort of such an amazing image. I found quite a few in that series, and just brought that kind of that story into public knowledge, really, because there's a lot of things that are in these archives all around the world, and they've been digitised online, so you can have a look at them, but people just don't see them until you kind of put it out there.
And what reaction did you have?
That particular one was amazing, really. It's emails from people all around the world thanking me for doing it. I mean, you get... for every project that I do that on that sort of scale, so I did one on the Holocaust for the 75th liberation of Auschwitz, and I had surviving Holocaust victims email to say that they not loved seeing the colours in pictures in colour, but it kind of brings out that emotion, and that was really good to hear from different people. So
it's odd how adding the colour brings emotion, doesn't it? I suppose our brains read it better somehow. Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, you can see it's like I say, the eyes. As soon as you connect with another human, it's through the eyes, and if those eyes are in colour, somehow it just comes across as more real and more relevant to the modern world. And
Tom, if people want to see the work that you're doing or be in contact with you, how do they find you online?
Well, I've got a website which is PhotograFix.com, but I have to spell it out. It's PhotoGRA-Fix, and I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, Tom Marshall Photo Colourised, and you'll find me on there.
Listen, Tom, I just think it's endlessly fascinating. I'd love people to go and have a look at what you do, because until you've seen the difference between the black and white version and then the colorized version, it's astonishing how your personal reaction to it changes. I think it's amazing, really. Tom, thank you. We'd love to talk again in the future. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. That's great.
Thanks.
Cheers, Ben. Thanks.